Because the Enneagram is such a great descriptive tool, it's easy to become enamored of the descriptions and kind of stop there in our use of the Enneagram. It's very tempting to see these vivid descriptions of ourselves and say, wow, I can't believe somebody captured me this well, or see our spouses or see our bosses. But the real purpose of the Enneagram is a model for growth. Okay, we have to first identify ourselves, identify our preferred strategy, and kind of the complex of behaviors and attitudes that goes along with that. But then we have to find some way to turn that into change and growth. Now, in our other video on the connecting points, we did talk a little bit about integrating those connecting points as one way of changing, but really where the biggest bang for the buck is in using the Enneagram for change is working with the preferred strategy. Okay? Now, a lot of approaches to change are kind of two steps. Stop doing this and start doing that. Don't do the thing that's not working for you and do something that will work for you. However, we all know that change is very difficult, and it's not that easy. It's not so simple as stop doing this and start doing that. Why is that? There's a couple of reasons. Number one is because change gets, behavior gets habituated into us, right? Our brain kind of builds these synaptic connections that incline us to behave in certain ways automatically. Okay? When we go to change, however, we can also run into what the psychologist Robert Kegan calls competing commitments. Okay? And this is what happens when we try to do something new. We start to find this competing commitment that comes up. We have this commitment to changing a behavior because intellectually we know it's good for us. Intellectually we know we're better off. But we also have these narratives that make the old behavior seem pretty logical. Okay? We're committed to that old behavior as well, either in an emotional way or in some, again, logical way that's really not completely logical when we think about it. Okay? Still, what happens is we get this one commitment to do this, and we have this other commitment to do that. The competition between these commitments usually is won by the old behavior because we're familiar with that, it's comfortable for us, so we tend to go down the old path instead of the new path. Okay? So if we really want to start making changes in our world, in our lives, we have to start working with our narratives, these stories that we have that keep the old behavior locked in place. Okay? And one of the beauties of the Enneagram is that it tells us the theme that's right at the heart of these narratives. Okay? It tells us this is the thing that you really need to focus on changing or redefining if you want to start altering your behavior. Now, the way we do this is called the awareness to action process. I'm going to talk about that. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about how our stories are created in the first place and the way that sort of fits in with Enneagram theory. Okay? Now, we all have these experiences of functioning on autopilot at different times in our lives, right? One very vivid example is when we're driving to work in the morning and we kind of, we go the same way every day and we don't really have to think about it that much. And then we have these moments where we sort of wake up halfway to work and we say, oh my goodness, where am I? Did I miss my exit? Did I make a wrong turn? We have these moments of uncertainty. Okay? We snap out of our autopilot with these moments of anxiety or uncertainty, and we have to find some sense of order, some explanation in order to make that anxiety go away. And that's where we look around us and we start to see road signs and we start to see landmarks, and that helps us to create the narrative of where we are. Ah, here I am. I didn't miss my exit. Okay? I know where I am. I can go back on autopilot until I get to work again. So we go through this sort of cycle of functioning on autopilot, snapping out of it with these moments of anxiety, and then making that anxiety go away by creating some narrative or story. Now, this process is actually represented by the inner triangle of the Enneagram. Okay, point 9 represents the ways that we go on autopilot, the way we go to sleep to ourselves. Point 6 represents fear or anxiety. Okay, it's this, oh, what do I have to do now that I see myself in the world? And point 3 represents the way we create these comforting narratives that help us make sense of the world, help us make sense of who we are. Okay? And the problem is that these narratives can kind of become false over time. They may have worked for us in the past, but now they've become a bit outdated and they're calcified, right? So something that worked for us as teenagers or even as children is now not working so well for us, and we need to learn ways to rewrite these strategies. Okay? But again, the challenge is that they're calcified and they're very rigid, and we have to have a structured, effective approach in dealing with them. And the thing that helps us to do that is to see how our preferred strategy holds those stories in place, right? So for example, if you're a type 1 and you're striving to be perfect, those narratives are going to be held in place by some old, outdated definition of what it means to be perfect or to feel perfect, okay? And if we don't start redefining what it means to be perfect, the one is not going to be able to change because it's going to bump up against this competing commitment that they have, okay? So we use the awareness to action process to overcome this calcified narrative rooted in an outdated strategy. Okay? And the first step of the process is by simply being aware. Instead of functioning on autopilot, we need to pay attention. Okay? Now, this doesn't mean that we have to be paying attention all the time, but when we feel that we're starting to run into some issues or some problems, we have to take a moment, stop, look at what our patterns are, look at what it is that we're doing that is causing us to suffer in some way. Okay? Then we want to recognize, again, as part of this awareness piece, in addition to paying attention, we want to recognize our old patterns, okay? And this is, again, the beauty of the Enneagram, is that it helps us to recognize these patterns, okay? We can see, yeah, I have a tendency to do this over and over and over again, okay? So it makes us vividly aware of what those old patterns are. Then what we want to do is set a goal for change. Instead of doing this, I want to do that, okay? Now, like we said before, it's not just two simple steps. We have to work in a way to resolve these competing commitments. Okay? So this is where we have to do what we call the authenticity piece. Right? If the first step in the awareness to action process is awareness, the second step is authenticity. What we mean by authenticity in this case is that we're clarifying, we're working with, we're rewriting our definition of the strategy so that it becomes more expansive, more flexible, and we're better able to start incorporating new behaviors in ways that allow us to change. Okay? Because if we don't work with that strategy, if we don't rewrite that strategy, psychologically we're going to reject any attempts to change, just like in the same way that a body would reject an implanted organ that was the wrong blood type. Okay? So we have to rewrite that strategy in a way that's more authentic, more real, more authentic to what's true in the world, and it's a healthier, more adaptive understanding of the strategy. Okay? And then we're going to set some action steps in place. And I always recommend to people that they pick small action items. Okay? Don't try to do too much. Identify some very specific action behaviors that will reinforce this new understanding of the strategy. Okay? Now I want to use the Enneagram Type 3, who prefers the strategy of striving to be outstanding, as an illustration of this. Okay? So very often as an executive coach, I work with 3s, and one of the big challenges they have is developing and delegating to subordinates. Okay? 3s get where they are by being outstanding. They work harder than other people. They work faster than other people. They are more productive than other people. As they start to rise in organizations, they realize that, even though I have these people working for me, it's just faster and easier for me to do things myself. I would do it better than other people. I do it faster than other people. And if I let them do it, I might just have to redo it anyway. And who has time to train people? Who has time to take time to develop people so they can do the tasks? So what you see is that 3s start to add more and more to their plate. And the greater their responsibility grows, the more they have to really struggle to keep up, because their span of influence and span of responsibility has grown so much, and they're still falling into the trap of doing things themselves. Okay, so the goal that the 3 sets is, how can I start to develop people and delegate to them better? Now the tricky part, again, is when they start to bump up against their old definition of striving to be outstanding. And that old definition tends to go something like, I can be outstanding by working harder than other people and by doing things better than other people and doing things myself. What we have to do with the 3 is start to help them realize that they can be more effective, they can be more outstanding by going from being an outstanding doer to being an outstanding leader. And then we start to look at what are some of the qualities of an outstanding leader. An outstanding leader is one who develops other people. It's one who does things through other people instead of doing it themselves. Okay? Somebody who does it themselves is an individual contributor. Now, we all need individual contributors in organizations, but if you're going to be a leader, you can't be an individual contributor just by definition. So the 3 has to rewrite that strategy. I'm going to go from being an outstanding doer to an outstanding leader. And they start making a list of, well, what are the qualities of an outstanding leader? What does the outstanding leader do? They develop people, they delegate to people. Now, the key here is that you're not working against the strategy. The challenge that, the mistake that a lot of people make is they think that you have to reject the strategy. They think that you have to see it as something bad, and therefore we have to go against it. If I'm a 3, well, don't worry about being outstanding. The problem is that most of our values, or our fundamental values, are rooted in that quality of being outstanding. And frankly, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't criticize the Dalai Lama and Gandhi for being outstanding spiritual leaders. We don't denigrate great musicians for being outstanding musicians, or great artists for being great artists. There's something very good about being outstanding, as long as we're doing it in adaptive ways that don't cause us or the people around us to suffer. Okay? So we don't have to reject this strategy. We can work with it, and then we start to clarify it. What do I mean by clarify it? Well, we start to continue to work with the strategy so that it starts to become more and more expansive in what it means, and it starts to allow us more flexibility and a greater range of behaviors. It allows us to eventually recognize that being outstanding means not really trying to be outstanding at all, but just by doing the right thing and working with people and empowering them instead of focusing on our own agenda. So what happens as we continue to work with the strategy is that it goes from being sort of a tightly bounded and restrictive understanding of what something means, particularly this strategy, to being more permeable, to being more expansive, to kind of looking like the rippling of the waves on a pond when you throw a stone into it. So it starts to expand outward, and eventually it starts to fade away. The story is always going to be there, the strategy is always going to be there, but it's clarified, okay, it's clear. There's a fear that some people have when we start talking about working with the strategy in this way, that maybe we're just feeding the ego or stroking the ego instead of overcoming it or annihilating it in some way. The reality, however, is that we can't just reject some fundamental part of ourselves. This strategy is something that's been with us a long time, and it's something that's part of ourselves. We have to work to clarify it. There's a great passage in A.H. Almas's, I think it's Diamond Heart, Book 4, where he talks about clarification of the personality. And he points out that we can't, it might feel like we're locked in some spiritual warfare as we're doing this work on ourselves. And maybe it is in a way, but warfare is not about obliterating the enemy. It's about integrating new territory. So when we work with the strategy, what we're doing is going into this part of ourselves that isn't working that well, and we're working to integrate it. I use the word clarifying because it's like clarifying butter. You're boiling it down, you're getting rid of all the impurities, so the best part of it is what's left. And this is what we want to do when we're working on rewriting these strategies. The reason I use the word authenticity here is because it has kind of the same root as the word author. It has to do with rewriting something or taking control of the narrative of a thing. So that's literally what we're doing. We're being more authentic by rewriting the strategy in a purer, more expansive way, but also a more permeable way so that we're able to incorporate more and more things into that. And eventually, by doing that, we hardly even notice it anymore. It doesn't restrict us anymore. Okay? So the idea here is by continually reworking the strategy, continuing to work on it all the time, allows it to become permeable and lets us get out of its grip. Okay? So we want to focus on rewriting the strategy. The other thing that we've noticed is that when you work on rewriting your preferred strategy, more flexibly using the other strategies actually becomes easier. We have to put less effort into working on those strategies.